What's good, y'all? You already know it's young Roley, you feel me, Rolando, and I'm doing a special podcast today with my good friend, Professor Dean Konkol. He's the dean of Hendricks Chapel in my university, Syracuse University, and I'm just gonna be having a conversation for about 45 minutes or so, and we're just gonna talk about basketball, rap music, spirituality, and all the above, and how they all intersect. I'm very excited, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So without further ado, Dean Konkol, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, it's great to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity. Brian Konkol, Dean of Hendricks Chapel here at Syracuse University. Been here since 2017, and it's been a great time, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And so for the people that don't know, like, what does it mean to be the dean of Hendricks Chapel? Like, can you just explain that a little bit?
Well, I'm still trying to figure it out, right? And, it's a lot of different things. First of all, Hendricks Chapel, dedicated in 1930 as a multi-faith space. So it's a remarkable, remarkable location. So we have 25 different religious groups that meet there. We intend to be a home for all faiths, a place for all people. It's the spiritual heart of our campus. So every single year there's over 1,000 programs that happen there. The attendance for all those programs totals hundreds of thousands of people each year. And it's a place where we seek to lead in service to the common good through religious and spiritual life. It's this sense that we are all connected, but how are we connected, and how do we seek to be connected? So as dean, I help to steward that mission. And in addition to that, I, of course, advise the chancellor here at the university as a member of the chancellor's leadership team. And as you mentioned before, I'm also a professor in the religion department. So it is a great place to serve and work and live. I love living in Syracuse. I love serving at Syracuse University, and each day is better than the one before it.
Yeah, so basically, like, for those that, may be a little confused, like, he basically runs the church on campus. And for those that don't know, we got a church on our campus. Like,
I would say, if I may, not necessarily. They have church in it, but it's a different part.
Oh yeah,
a chapel.
A chapel.
There's actually
yeah.
a fun story about that. A chapel. I won't bore you with the long version, but the word chapel comes from hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
And it's really about being a keeper of sacred things.
Yeah.
So there is a difference, and they do, of course, we do hold church services. We also hold Jewish services, and Muslim students, and many others. So it's a multi-faith chapel, and I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. And one last thing, before we move on, I've seen, like, being inside the chapel, is that they've had a lot of different deans, in the history of Syracuse University. So can you just talk about, like, how you got into your position, and what does it mean to be what number right now?
Number 7.
Number 7.
Number 7. Yeah.
Word.
It's a fascinating history in that we have the portraits of the 6 previous deans in the entryway. So I have the good fortune of being able to see them and think about that legacy and that history and the responsibility that our team has in this current era. It's a role that I take very seriously. How do you steward religious and spiritual life? And for me, the quick version is I came into this work because of my own transformative college experience, where I was able to learn not just intellectually, but learn spiritually, emotionally, holistically. And so in part, because of my own powerful college experience, I was fundamentally convinced of the power of higher education to change lives for the better. And I thought this was one of the best ways for me to be able to do that.
Word, that's amazing. So before we get into the specific questions, I just wanted to, for the audience, I wanted to just answer, how do we know each other? And if you remember, I was actually, my sophomore year, I was going to go on this abroad program, the Truth and Reconciliation in a Post-Apartheid South Africa. And I had been emailing you because I was really excited for the program, but it ended up becoming it got canceled because of COVID.
I know.
So I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
that's how we met. But from then on, like we kind of, slowly,
touch.
started, we stayed in touch.
Well, that was unfortunate. I mean, there's many things unfortunate about the COVID-19 pandemic, one of which was the cancellation of that course. My wife and I
Yeah.
had lived in South Africa for a number of years.
Yeah.
And so to be able to go back to South Africa with Syracuse University students was something we were really excited about. And of course, it didn't work out, but next time.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually have a funny story that I wanted to tell you, before we get into these questions.
Oh, let's hear it. I'm ready.
So, I don't know if you remember, but during like my ceremony for graduation, right? Like, so when how everyone like shook your hand, like I like instinctually, I like dapped you up, and then all of my friends like in the audience, they're like, did you just dap up Dean Konkol? And I'm like, yeah, like that's my man's, So
I'm honored.
Yeah.
I'm honored.
So I wanted to share that with you. But let's get started with these questions because we don't got too much time. So, the audience don't know this, but I know this, but you're actually a hooper.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
I don't know about how my skills have deteriorated over the years. But yeah, I grew up in a basketball family.
Yeah.
And we somehow convinced my parents to put in a full basketball court where I grew up. And that was so much of my life. My younger sister, my older brother, and of course cousins, friends, we all congregated to our house and played nonstop. So many of my cousins played in college. I played in college. My brother's now a Division I basketball coach. My wife Kristen played D1 at the University of Toledo. So it has been
Hooper family.
I love the game.
Yeah, me too.
And it has taught me so much, especially playing in college. And those lessons continue with me to this day. And I still love to get up a few shots from time to time. And I love to support our men's and women's team here at Syracuse University. So it's very much in my DNA.
I love that. I love basketball too. I'll get into my background a little bit, but before that, like, can you talk to me about your game? Like, like,
Tell me about me.
Yeah, like position you
I've
played.
never been asked this question. This is great. Well, my game back in the day, I was never incredibly athletic.
Okay.
So I had to compensate for that. So I was a pretty good shooter.
Ah.
I was a two guard. I wasn't really quick. Couldn't really jump all that high, but I was a decent shooter. So that kept me on the floor, gave me playing time. I would say.
What was your defense like?
Well, it depends upon who you ask. If you ask me, I think I was above average. But if you ask my coach, he might tell you I was below average. But I'll tell you this too. I worked hard.
Yeah.
I worked hard.
I mean, you play college basketball, like I have like a very, high level of respect for all, basketball players that get to play at that level because you have to work hard in order to get there.
Well, thank you. I love to play. And part of it to me was my older brother was exceptional. My older brother was our high school's all-time leading scorer. So I had a mentor that I was constantly competing with. So any sliver of success I had was a credit to my older brother. I was always trying to live up to his standard. He was competitive, and trying to keep up with him was a big part for me.
Yeah.
So, but I loved going to practice. I loved skill work.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that is not done enough today.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I love to get up and down the floor and play pickup and do all those things, but the drill work and really getting your footwork down, getting your hand speed, because I knew I was physically limited in terms of my size and my quickness, so I had to try to find ways to make up for that with skills. And so and it was also a sweetness to it. This was small town central Wisconsin, so these people would come out and support the team and travel with the team. And so I loved playing high school ball. I had the good fortune of playing with my older brother, my cousin Mark, a number of good friends that continue to be my friends to this day. But some of my fondest memories were playing in my parents' front yard. And we would this is early video, right? Camcorders that you put
Yeah,
on your
yeah.
shoulder, big old.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'd set up the camcorder, and we'd play pickup ball, and then we would go inside, watch it, and then keep our stats. And we'd
Yeah.
keep our stats throughout the summer, and
Yeah.
I'd have a notebook to keep them. Yeah, so we were early analytics as well. But
Yeah.
it was a great time, and I'll tell you, some of the most important lessons I think about to this day came from
Yeah.
playing basketball. Learning how to win with dignity, learning how to lose with dignity, learning how to give a full effort,
Yeah.
learning how to have a positive attitude,
Yeah.
and learning how to be a good teammate.
Yeah.
And those were lessons that I had to learn through sport. And those lessons to this day are just as important as anything I ever learned in a classroom.
Yeah. Nah, that's amazing. I could definitely, like, as a hooper myself, I could definitely hear and see your love for the game. It's very apparent.
Yeah.
And so I guess since you are a shooter, I ask you a quick question, rapid fire answer.
Oh, no, this is scary. Okay.
How do you feel about the state of basketball now, especially being a shooter, where now, like before, I'm like a student of the game, I would say, and a lot of like old heads, like they talk about, like you can't win shooting the ball. Well, now in my generation, it's been proven that you can win shooting the ball. So how do you feel you would have fit in this new era of basketball?
It's amazing to me to see how the game has changed. And I love college basketball. I love watching professional basketball. It's amazing to me the skill level.
Yeah.
I mean, every generation of player builds on the generation before it. So I try not to get into, who is the greatest of all time? Was it Jordan? Was it LeBron?
Yeah.
These are generational conversations, and each generation builds on the one before it.
Yeah.
The current game, number one, the skill level of players is remarkable. The level of scoring is far higher than what I grew up in. I mean, our games in the NBA, when I grew up, 95 to 85, kind of this is the Jordan and Detroit Pistons bad boy time. And now you can look at a score that's 135 to 120. It's just a different thing.
Yeah.
I think clearly there's a much more reliance on the three-point shot. You kind of live or die by the three now. In terms of critique, I would love to see more, mid-range games, kind of a tactical aspect. But every game has a different generation, and I enjoy watching. I enjoy college. I enjoy watching the NBA, and I'm a fan.
Word. Well, just, to just respond to everything you said, like, I grew up playing basketball as well. It wasn't my first sport. My first sport was actually soccer, which I didn't enjoy at all. But and where I'm from, New York City, like basketball is our sport, is the sport that's played all throughout the city. And just being able to go to different places in America, and also when I travel to London, like we have a basketball court on every block, basically, like in the city. And so that's why it's so, everyone plays. And, not to talk about my experiences too much because, I'm interviewing you. But, basketball was, I would say, rough for me because it's so competitive growing up in New York City. And I was also not as like physically gifted or as like the next kid. And I didn't really have like, any siblings or any like people in my life that played before. I just had a real strong love for the game. And, I really looked up to like people like Kobe Bryant. He was one of the most influential people in my life, and it's just his work ethic and his just desire to get better. So I would just go to the court by myself. But, first, shout out, my coaches, shout out Nate, shout out my AAU team, make a play. They taught me the game, around like my 8th grade, to high school years. I started in middle school where I didn't make the basketball team all 3 years, and it just lit a fire in me to get better. Where once I got to high school, I played all 4 years. And even my sophomore year, I had a chance to go to varsity, but I just chose to stay in JV. But basketball showed me the work, and it also showed me like how when you have a desire to get better at something and you put in the time, like results come, and I got hurt actually my senior year. I sprained both my ankles, but it was actually one of my goals to try to play basketball in SU. And I feel like I could have done it even if it took my senior year to do it. But honestly, I actually, talk about this a little bit in a separate video, but just life has just happened. I was just, it was a different environment. It wasn't like a lack of like the game or being, just not feeling encouraged to do so. It was just like, the classwork was just so different from high school, different opportunities with clubs, with programs. I feel like if you really committed to the game, you got to be committed to the game. You know what I mean? And that takes a lot of time. So that's why I didn't continue to pursue it. But I'm a big hoop head. Like in my summers, I still work on my skills. I still run. I would say that physically, I'm probably not where I was like when I was, in 12th grade, but skill wise, I've definitely still improved. So, long term, I'm hoping to continue playing, but let's move on, so there's something that I actually learned about you. You're a big rap fan, right? So could you just quickly talk about how
Well,
you got into hip hop, and what made you just enjoy it?
this is the most intimidating interview I've ever done. I never get asked about this. This is great. Um, wow. Well, I told you before, I grew up in small town, central Wisconsin,
Yeah.
a couple hundred people.
Yeah.
So for me, part of having a transformative college experience was experiencing people
From all walks
from
of
places,
life.
yeah, people
Yeah.
with experiences far different than mine. And so,
Yeah.
so for me, coming from central Wisconsin to college was
What school did you go to
went to
again?
Viterbo University in La Crosse,
Right.
Wisconsin, and I had a great experience. Part of that was being introduced to cultures and backgrounds unlike my own. And so for me, hip hop was in many ways like foreign travel. You would be welcomed into a world that was exceptionally different from the world that I grew up in. So
Yeah.
I found just the lyrics and the beats, the artistry, of course, hip hop culture, and in particular rap within that culture
Yeah.
to be very compelling. And I think too, when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you're
Yeah.
trying to find yourself, you're trying to experience new things. And I think there was something about the nature of the music at that time that felt rebellious, it felt loud, it
Yeah.
felt out there. And I think when you're 18, 19, 20 years old in the late 1990s, that related to me. So thinking about it, in some ways, it was perhaps a precursor to me wanting to live internationally. There was something about experiencing cultures incredibly different from my own, and how do you recognize that just because something is different doesn't mean it's deficient. And so for me, during those formative years of college, that was, Tupac, Notorious B.I.G., DMX was really big when I was in college. You got Run DMC. I could go on. That was Beastie Boys, Wu-Tang. These were artists and groups that were just part of the liturgy of our experience of that time. And
Yeah.
of course, that was introduced to me by many of my basketball teammates and
Yeah.
others. And to this day, it's with me. I read recently that the music that was important to you or was most frequent to you kind of between the ages of 18 and 25 kind of sticks with you
Yeah.
for a long time. And I've read that recently, and that's the case, that I can still hear one of those songs and it just takes you right back. And yeah, I appreciate it a great deal.
Word. With that being said, then, what do you think the role of like hip hop / rap music is in today's society?
Well, I'm by no means an expert. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm in many ways unqualified to answer. But as an amateur, I think that it's important for people to have voice.
Yeah.
Whether it's rap, whether it's hip hop culture, whether it's various modes of communication, genres of music, so on and so forth. That when people are given a platform to speak,
Yeah.
right? That's a good thing. I believe in freedom of expression. I believe in free speech. I believe that people should be able to proclaim or testify, if you will, to the truth of their experience. And rap music in particular, hip hop culture and more in general, I think is an important contribution
Mhm.
to our national global dialogue.
Mm.
And so for me to this day, in addition to just enjoying, right? You know,
Yeah.
who doesn't enjoy a good beat, a good,
Yeah.
but actually listening to the lyrics that are actually being spoken, that's something I try to lock in on.
Yeah.
Is not just listening to the music, but perhaps trying to find the lyrics, dive in. I remember I was in seminary. I was taking a class on the Psalms.
Mm.
And at the beginning of class, the professor said, name your favorite poet.
Mm.
And everyone was naming the class, you know. And finally, a classmate of mine said, Run DMC.
Mm.
And it never occurred to me
Mm.
until that moment when you're thinking about the poetry, the lyrics, the rhythm, the rhyme, and trying to dive in and experience that in a new way. So it's still important to me, and I continue to learn a lot because that is not the experience that I grew up with.
Yeah.
So it's still important for me to learn, and I enjoy it to this day.
Yeah, I really like how you talked about poetry, because one of my biggest realizations when I was in high school and I took a class my senior year on just poetry was that Tupac was actually a poet before he became a rapper. And, growing up, you have this idea, this perception of Tupac as, this thug, like this tough guy. But then when you like do more research and dig in, you realize, oh, like he was an art student who was a poet, who was an actor, before all the stuff happened with him. And, just talking about like my background with hip hop, I was born in Dominican Republic, but I was raised in New York City. And I didn't really get into hip hop until I was in elementary school. And one of my friends actually, he put me on to Eminem, and during that time, like I was going through a lot of things with school, trying to like just figure out like, trying to overcome a lot of things. And I remember this one song that he made, Not Afraid, like it really stuck with me because, like you said, like the words, like they was really speaking to me. And him and Lil Wayne, like at an early age, like it was just like kind of opened me up to a whole new world, and especially like being from New York City where, Notorious B.I.G., Nas, Wu-Tang, like all these historic, artists and groups like come from, like it made me really appreciate, where I'm from. And it influences me now, like being an artist, wanting to keep that alive. I always talk about, like people ask me, what do I want in the future? And I just really want to be respected as a New York City artist. I want to add to the rich history that has already been established. I want to carve my mark being from New York City, being from Manhattan. And so you already kind of touched upon it a little earlier, but what's your top 5 that are alive all time in hip hop?
Like I said, this is a frightening interview. I've never been asked these publicly. I mentioned, Tupac, Notorious B.I.G. I was really into DMX. Maybe he'd be number 3. Then this starts getting tough. I mean, Snoop Dogg was really big. Then number 5. I'm gonna go with the group Public Enemy.
Heard.
Yeah. Public Enemy.
Yeah.
Those 5. And even as I say it now, I'm starting to think about what about, Beastie Boys and then you Salt and Pepper, Queen Latifah, Lauryn Hill and the Fugees. Right? Yeah.
That era was truly rich.
Yeah.
It was truly rich.
Yeah.
I guess I have one last question. Me being like a new hip hop artist, like what, in a way, like, you don't have to be too hard on me, but what would you want from me as a hip hop artist, knowing that, you came from this rich generation of just rich, poets that spoke about something? Like, what would you want from me as an artist?
Wow.
In my generation?
I'm just going to keep repeating that I am not an expert on this.
No, yeah.
I'm utterly unqualified, but I would say this in general is say what you have to say.
Yeah.
There's when I was living in South Africa, I learned about an amazing activist, Steve Biko, anti-apartheid activist who was killed by the white nationalist government decades ago. He wrote a book called I Write What I Like. So that would probably be my advice. Write what you like.
Yeah.
And let your life speak, and the rest will take care of itself.
Thank you. I like that. All right, so transitioning into our final questions for this podcast, and we about to talk about, spirituality, religion, wellness, and how all three of these intersect. What, in your own words, is spirituality, and how can it lead to wellness or a better well-being?
Spirituality is the art of paying attention. It's about the art of paying attention to the ways that you and I are connected. You and I were connected long before we ever met in person,
Yeah.
and we will be connected long after our time on this planet. I believe that. So spirituality is paying attention to the ways we are connected, and then being intentional about how we should be connected. Because just because you're connected doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you or good for me. If you punch me, we're connected. But I won't appreciate the nature of that connectivity.
Yeah.
So spirituality invites us into the reality that we do not exist on our own. I need you to become myself.
Yeah.
Because a person is only a person through other people.
Yeah.
Spirituality invites us into relationship. It invites us to recognize that our lives don't simply belong to ourselves. And as a result, there's a sense of gratitude for those that have contributed to where we are today, but also a sense of responsibility that I'm contributing towards the lives of others as well.
Word. And just so, recalling our conversation from a week ago, what do you think the role of religion plays in everyone's life?
Sure.
And can play?
The word religion comes from the Latin word religare, which is the same root word for ligament. So religion at its core is about connectivity. It's about connection. So whether it's traditional religious practices or personal, public, religion is about ways and means by which we connect with others. So for example, myself, I'm a Lutheran minister. That tradition, that theology, that cadence and liturgy, both formal and liturgies of life, help me to have a community by which I'm accountable to, a community that I'm responsible for, and those practices of the faith help me to be connected in ways that I think are an expression of my own faith and help to bring life to others. So I think it's about being in service to the common good so that I, as a Lutheran, have both roots in that tradition and reach that provide care, hospitality, and love towards others. So it's both roots and reach. Like the trees outside on this beautiful day we're having, the trees don't have to choose between the roots and the reach. So why should we? And that's what I think makes Hendricks Chapel a beautiful place to be. And I try to apply that to my own faith, that I can have deep Lutheran roots as a Christian, and from those roots I can have branches that extend love and hospitality to people unlike myself, hoping that they would do the same for me. So that's where I find my meaning, and I'm learning about it each day, always falling a little bit short of it, but trying to make each day better than the one before it.
Yeah, definitely. And I watched somewhere in this Oprah Winfrey interview, I talked to you about it, that Maya Angelou described religion as the roadmap of spirituality. So there's so many different religions that they're all going to the same place, just having different practices to get there.
I'm not going to argue with Maya Angelou or Oprah.
Yeah.
A sense of roadmap. For me, people say, well, religion is a crutch. And my response to that is, oh, absolutely. And I need that crutch because on my own, I can't navigate life. These religious traditions that have been existing for generations long before me, to enter into that, I find very comforting and meaningful. And knowing that those traditions will exist long after myself, I find great comfort in that.
Yeah. something bigger than ourselves,
Yeah.
We're only human.
Yeah.
We're only just two men.
Yeah, I think religion gets a bad rap, and I understand why. Institutions are filled with humans, and
Yeah.
humans fall short, and so people want to use that to provide a negative thought towards organized religion, which I understand. Nevertheless, at its core, I do have a commitment to the institutional church and my own Lutheran tradition, and also institutions of higher education like Syracuse University and what we do at Hendricks Chapel. I think that institutions at their best are the hands that bless the world. And so I'm not going to give up on organized religion. I'm not going to give up on organized education.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep trying to contribute the best I can.
Yeah. And so you answered this, but just to ask you the question again, what lessons do you feel that we can learn from religion, and how do they apply to spirituality?
I think first, I would say there is responsibility. For me, the first thing that I take, one of the first things I take from my own religious practice is that I am responsible for that which is outside of myself, that I am not a self-autonomous, independent being. I need others, and others need me. And religion draws us into that and provides guidance as to how to do that. And I think that's the connection then to spirituality. I think Maya Angelou said it wonderfully. Here's this sense of roadmap. It's not just where do I want to get to, it's how do I get there? And that's where these practices come into play. And I think about my own tradition of reading the Bible, prayer, communal worship, service, the list goes on and on. Those practices, those habits that need to be cultivated over time enter one into an awareness of our dependence upon one another, and how it is that we honor that dependence by caring for others and allowing ourselves to be cared for by others. So I love Maya Angelou's quote that you mentioned a moment ago. It is a roadmap to spirituality, and part of our calling, I would argue, as a Lutheran, is to live into that and to honor that.
Yeah, 100%. And, I want to recall this time last year. We talked about this, but just for the audience, like, I was going through a very hard time in my college experience where, I felt very lost. But a friend actually took me to Palm Sunday, where you were, speaking about, Jesus and the story of the Last Supper. And, religion has been like around my life, but I've never been like committed to any practice just because it's never been, just put in my life like that. But it really spoke to me because when the way you was describing Jesus and how he knew that, these disciples, these people, one of them was gonna basically do him wrong, and he still accepted them. He still welcomed them to his table, and he felt bad. He actually felt bad for that individual because he was really hurting himself. I thought like that really spoke to me because I have a lot of just challenges, forgiving people, overcoming anger, learning to move on. And I felt like in that moment, the way you described it, it was so seamless for him that I felt that was a truly godly feat for me personally, because, we learn, stories about him changing water to wine and walking on water and come back from the dead. But when you really trying to learn to forgive someone and then you hearing a story of a man that just willingly forgave and just, welcomed everyone with open arms, like I felt like that was very powerful.
Well, thank you for that. Forgiveness is miraculous in many ways, and I appreciate your kind words. I remember that. And one of my favorite quotes, and I may have said it that day, was resentment corrodes its container.
Yeah.
And when we are resentful, we ourselves are the one that corrode, right? When we let others live rent-free in our minds and hearts. And forgiveness is an act of liberation. It sets us free, and in many ways it sets others free as well.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right? We want to hold a grudge, and retaliation is the way of the world so often,
Yeah.
right? We want an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I think that there's something quite radical about forgiveness and reconciliation and truth and transformation and the way that they all come together. I think that forgiveness, it is an act of liberation,
Yeah.
both for us personally and us in society as well. So I appreciate your kind words.
Yeah, of course. And with that being said, how can we ideally live in a way where we suffer less and enjoy life more?
Wow. Suffer less and enjoy life more. You ask really good questions. You're good at you're good at this. You're good at this.
Thank you.
I'll come at it in a different way. I do think that suffering is an inevitable part of life.
Yeah.
That we, of course, don't want people to suffer. But I think sometimes, for example, when we grieve and when we feel sorrow, grief and sorrow and suffering are oftentimes an expression of love.
Yeah.
For example, I imagine in all of our lives, the people with the most capacity to hurt us are the people we love the most.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, if you don't ever want to hurt, then don't ever love.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure if the complete omission of suffering is the goal.
Yeah.
Now there's human suffering, of course.
Yeah.
Hunger, starvation. That's, I think, clearly we want to end that form of suffering. But when I think about what some would say suffering as grief and loss, to be the totality of what it means to be human, there is an element that we shouldn't run and hide from: sadness and from grief and from sorrow, because those are part of the attributes of what makes us most human. So I think when it comes to living in this world and the countless issues that we're facing, part of it for me is that people finding the courage to answer what their calling is.
Yeah.
What do I mean by calling? I mean where your gifts, joys, and passions match up with the needs of the world.
Yeah.
Where your gifts, joys, and passions match up with the needs of the world. Where those two things come together, that is where you find your calling.
Yeah.
And of course, those are dynamic. Your joys and gifts are always changing,
Yeah.
and the needs of the world are always changing. So if people have a capacity to continually discern what their calling is at any given time, I'm convinced that that tapestry of people coming together in different places and time helps to alleviate the countless social struggles that we face in our world today. And in doing so, helps us to live into what I would say is the fullness of life.
Yeah.
That fullness of joy and sorrow, happiness, sadness, and helps us to be most fully human, and in doing so, make that world a little bit of a better place.
Yeah, 100%. And, this really relates to the book, that I was telling you I was reading, The Four Agreements. And something that the book talks about is that we cause a lot of our own problems as humans. And I could, speaking solely for myself, could say that I've definitely added to my own suffering. And just some lessons that I've learned through the book are just that, we must try to be impeccable with our word. And what that means is that being impeccable means without sin. And the book describes the greatest sin as being sin against oneself. And whenever, you speak ill of another, as you described, we are a reflection of the world. So me speaking ill of another is really speaking ill of myself. So really committing to, being impeccable with our word, because our words are so powerful. They can affect others, they can affect ourselves, and as well as not taking things personally, because the actions of others are really just a reflection of themselves and what they're going through, and as well as not making assumptions. I feel like that's really huge, especially in the world that we live in, because I just think society romanticizes gossip in a way. Growing up as kids, we see our parents gossiping, we gossip in school. But at the end of the day, they're just assumptions. No one really knows what's going on in someone's life. So, it's best to go through life with a clear mind. And then the last one being, as we talked about throughout this podcast, just doing your best, you know, and just how powerful that is, and you know, just feeling content with knowing that, you know, you've done the best that you can, and just speaking a little bit more about just my experiences, as I told you, this is the first year I've actually practiced Ramadan with the support of my Muslim friends. And it's been very powerful for me because I've been on a quest to truly learn to forgive and truly be able to move on and to really let go of like my anger. And I talked to my stepfather yesterday, and he was telling me how when you fast, like you're actually able to have more of a clear mind, and you'll be able to just, you know, sit with things more and be able. And I'm actually a very anxious person. I haven't been biting my nails like throughout this whole time, so it's been very powerful. But this last thing that I want to, you know, get your thoughts in. So I'm a really big fan in anime and manga, and this one manga that I was reading recently called Vinland Saga. It talks about the quest of the true warrior, right? And what they describe that as is, you know, the quest to learn to forgive, because it's so difficult. You know what I mean? I come from, like, my background in New York City, and also my family background. There's a lot of hate. You know, there's a lot of practices of, you know, self-hate. There's a lot of hate in my community for, like, each other. You know what I mean? There's a lot of, you know, death and crime, and killing, and like I said, gossip and assumptions. But when you're committed to trying to learn to forgive and really looking at yourself in the mirror, the man at the mirror, and you realize, like, this is hard. Like, this is not easy. And as you described, like, taking one step every day, and we might not live up to, you know, that expectation that we want every day, but that truly, the manga has helped me see that's the path of the true warrior. That's the path, because it's not easy, you know, and it's gonna be the hardest thing that you try to do in your life, is trying to, you know, forgive and trying to live in a way where, you know, you're free, and, you know, you treat others well, and you let go of the pains and suffering that, you know, you've lived through in most of your life. But, you know, if you commit yourself to that, you're just gonna be so, you know, well, like, down the road, you know. So I just want to get your final thoughts on that.
I think one of the key distinctions is, you know, forgiveness is not necessarily condoning what someone has done. I think people oftentimes misunderstand that. I think part of forgiveness is when we stop hoping for a better past.
Yeah.
We stop playing that rewind button over and over in our minds, and we move forward. I also don't think forgiveness requires forgetting. I think that it's good to remember.
Yeah.
It's good to remember that's where the seeds of wisdom are sown. But there's a difference between sowing wisdom and holding grudges.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to remember what has happened. In doing so, allowing those incidents, the experiences, to build wisdom and help to guide who we are. So we can forgive and remember, and that allows us to not just reconcile, but also to transform that which led to the brokenness in the first place.
Yeah.
So that forgiveness and reconciliation isn't just saying, okay, we're good, let's move on. It's an invitation to transform what led to the hurt in the first place, and then empowering each other to move forward. So there's that reconciliation, transformation, and empowerment, that three-part symphony, if you will, and they're all intertwined. So forgiveness is a key part of that, but not the only part of that. Because forgiveness and reconciliation also requires, I would argue, transformation and empowerment, and that in turn helps us to leverage the wisdom that we receive from that experience and move forward.
Yeah, and I feel like that last part, transformation, is so important, because I truly do believe that, you know, that you beginning to transform when it doesn't react the same way. It doesn't hit the same way. You know, you're not, you know, angry anymore. You're more understanding. And, you know, we're wrapping up, you know, it's the last couple minutes of the podcast. And just humans, you know what I mean? We're such an interesting species where, you know, we could do something wrong to somebody and it might not be intentional. but that person might receive it intentionally. So just learning to just be more accepting of others, and knowing that, like I said, like their actions are not a reflection of you and more of them and what they're going through. But just wrapping up now. Do you have any closing remarks that you want to leave with the audience?
I want to say thank you for this. We have talked about basketball. We've
Yeah.
talked about hip hop and rap. We've talked
Yeah.
about religion and spirituality and forgiveness
Yeah.
and a whole bunch of other things. This is the most wide ranging, fun, slightly terrifying interview I think I've ever done. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share and discuss together. Just thank you for the opportunity.
Man, thank you. I'm truly grateful. You're a very busy person, so I'm grateful that you was able to carve out some time, sit down with me, talk to my community, allow us to just share, our perspectives. Like just these last couple remarks. A lot of people don't have a Dean Konkol, in their life. You know what I mean? I'm very blessed to be able to have like a relationship with you where I could email you and we could have a sit down, and I could be real with you, and talk about my shortcomings and, where I want to go and what I need as a person, help. But, I feel like it's so powerful to be able to sit down with you and, kind of open the world, my community to you and be able to grant them some lessons from you. So just thank you so much. I'm very grateful to have you in my life as a friend, as a mentor, and just thank you again. Thank you.
Likewise, I'm honored, blessed to have you in my life as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Y'all already know, young Roley, feel me? We just talking that real to the people, sharing that love, trying to grow, trying to move forward as a society, trying to do better for the city. And that's it, you feel me? Thank y'all for tuning in. Till next time.